and thanks for tuning in. For the Looking Back series, I'm Marianne Pleva. Our guest today, Harry Bird, grew up in New York City. A lifelong learner and adventurer, Harry holds a doctorate from the University of Oklahoma. He and his partner, Goody, have lived in Essex for over 20 years. He's here today to talk about the amazing memoir writings of his mother, Margaret McKelvy Bird, and how they recently came to light. Welcome, Harry.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
So glad to have you here because it always seems like a long time since we first meet and with the idea, and then it actually happens. So, as a little background, what did bring you to Essex?
Well, I sort of started a new life when I met Goody, and she had a house in Westchester and I had a house in Westchester, and we decided to merge, and we sort of floated around looking for a place, and we got to the top of Main Street in Essex and fell in love. It's pretty instantaneous, and we had no intention of buying a house, but a week later we bought a house.
That's a great story.
Just fell in love.
There's a lot of those stories, and a lot of them are to do with boating too. A lot of people say, oh yeah, they sailed in and...
Yeah, we used to sail in, and, but all we saw was the Grizz. We'd walk up and have dinner at the Grizz and turn around and go back to the boat. So we never had much of a chance to see the town.
Right, so now you saw it all, and you see it all every day probably.
It's a lovely place, yeah.
So your dad was well known professionally. Could you talk about his career?
Goodness.
I know it was a long one.
I will tell a very short story that sets the tone for who he was and how this all happened. And when he was 12 years old, a neighbor had a horse that had died, and my father asked the neighbor if he could have the horse because he wanted the hide, and the neighbor said, fine, but you have to bury it. Now he's 12 years old, and he buried a horse and skinned it, and tried to tan the hide and failed utterly. But that sort of is what he was about. There's no challenge too big.
Right.
And always looking for a solution.
Yeah, and it's amazing that he knew where his career was going to go, even at that age.
Yeah.
It's great. And your mom had an interesting background as well.
She was, and that's the contrast of this book that's so amazing, is that my father was, as I say, that style of life. And she grew up principally in New York City society and was, in the social register and all that stuff. And in 1931, they met at a mutual friend's place in Rye, and apparently fell in love immediately. I don't know why, but they did. And so she went from being this socialite of New York to marrying my father and going on this adventure, which we'll talk about.
But her real beginnings were a little different.
They were. As I pieced the story together, and much of this has to be pieced together, she was, her mother was pregnant in Montreal. She was Irish and she wasn't supposed to be pregnant. So she visited her sister in New York State and left behind my mother at this farm. And when she was about 3, she was discovered by her new parents who came from Titusville. And they essentially purchased her. The adoption was complicated back then, I think. You just purchased it, So she went from being on a chicken farm to living in Titusville, Pennsylvania. Her father was the son of one of the co-founders of Tidewater Oil, so they were pretty well off. And she was tutored, and she went off to Bryn Mawr and all those private schools and so forth. So she had a very comfortable life up until 1931.
When she got married?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, she had a very interesting start. So she did. She had an interesting life as well, which we'll get into a little bit later. So your father, an archaeologist, and where do we have the picture of his? Did we show the picture of his place of business, which is very...
Was that the museum?
Yeah, the museum.
There it is.
Aha. Yeah, that's a kind of a cool place to go to work every day, isn't it?
He was there from, I think, 1927 to 1982. He was there his entire life, just about. And that's where we grew up playing, in the hallways of the museum.
Uh-huh.
Had great adventures there.
Yeah, and oh, there was another picture of your dad, but maybe, was it already? Oh,
There he is. Yeah.
Okay, that he does look like Indiana Jones.
Indiana Jones picture.
Yeah.
That's what they say.
Cool hat.
Yeah.
So I guess you were fortunate because as a child you got to partake in some of this archaeological stuff, right?
Well, we did. Various ways of looking at that. There was no question that we went. So at 1 year old, I was in Chile, but I don't remember a thing about it. I dragged off to a dig there. But when I was 6 years old, we were in Peru at a mound called Huaca Prieto, which was a very ancient mound of refuse. So people would gather and just throw everything aside, and this mound grew to about 200 feet in height. So we dug into that, and we spent a year there, which I remember very clearly. I remember the dirt and the dust, the lizards, the skulls, all sorts of stuff.
And I think we have a little video of that as well, of you as,
There's
here
our
we
campsite.
go.
That was our main tent. That's my mother calling us. The little thing on the right was the kitchen. And there's my brother Bob and I running down from the Huaca Prieta's mound on the left there. And you know, when Mother called, we came.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about it.
And what stands out about this? How long were you away?
A year.
Oh, you were gone a whole year.
A whole year,
oh, my
right on the
goodness.
coast, on the ocean, yeah.
Wow, what an
And
experience.
so one of our pet activities was pet lizards. And we're showing off our latest lizard.
Well, there must have been plenty of those around, huh?
Yeah, and that was our wash stands.
Uh-huh.
I had to wash up. And it's funny, I can still remember the smell of the soap.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, soapy water. And that's my brother Tom in the middle.
Tom, yeah.
And that was the drain.
Huh. So what other things I mean, what would you say, thinking back, what stands out the most? I mean, it was very different
Of
than the
that
average
trip?
camping trip.
Of that trip?
Yeah.
Well, it was the dust, because when archaeology is not the nice glossed over picture most people think of, you know, adventures in Egypt and discovering tombs. There it is, he's digging through the dirt and pouring out the dirt into, these were filters. And so there was continuous dust all the time. And it was all salty because it was near the ocean, so salty, dry dust.
Yeah.
That's what sticks in my mind.
And no real showers
Shower?
hooked up.
There was a little stream.
For
My
cleaning
father-
up before dinner.
My father dug a hole by the stream, which was full of water, and he'd just jump in there and get out of there.
Okay.
So,
I guess we're jumping around a little with my questions here, but you know, they were married, and then I guess within 2 years they took this major trip.
well, very shortly after they were married, my father, who had sailed to the Arctic with Captain Bob Bartlett on the Morrissey about 3 or 4 times, and he persuaded my mother, or essentially told my mother, that they were there, got married. They were going to go off to Labrador I think it was Labrador, to dig up Eskimo dwellings. And here's my mother, straight from Park Avenue, off on the Morrissey to camp out for a few months to dig up Eskimo stuff. So that was her introduction, and then they came back from that, and the museum sent them off to Chile, which is where this book starts.
So were they home? They were home. They went home, or they went from one place to
home
the
for a
next?
while. I
Yeah.
don't. Yeah.
Yeah. So okay. So okay. So the first adventure, I guess, or maybe both adventures, there were some characters. You called them characters. You want to talk about the characters and?
Oh, in this story, yeah. Well, of course, there's my parents. They adopted a dog. There's my father after digging for the day. That's archaeology in a nutshell, right there. And he was happy as a clam. You can see him smiling. So And that's my mother. And she seemed happy all the time. These big round boulders they found. And so they adopted this dog, Manyeka. There's Manyeka on, they're not
Funny
ostrich
dog.
eggs, I forget what you call them. And then they bought a 19-foot fishing boat and outfitted it for cruising down the coast. Well, cruising is a generous term. And there's the boat, and they lived on that for, I think it was 9 months. And they couldn't pitch their tent along the shore, which is all rocky, so they pitched it over the boom and lived on the boat for the duration. And I had a little dinghy. And there's their major cave. They found some pretty significant stuff in there. They dug up horse bones from very prehistoric times. So it was the first horse in the Americas that was discovered, well before Spaniards, well before anything.
Right up your father's alley, right?
Right up his alley. And
so then the other character, the car, that was in the second part of the trip.
in the second part,
okay.
when they were done with the boat was named Hesperus, and there's Elizabeth.
Okay.
That was an old Model T truck they bought for $28, and it kept breaking down. And you know, that was my father. He'd just fix it. You don't call AAA. You don't call anybody. You just fix it.
Very inventive.
At one point, they ran out of gas. So this was in Chile, and there was tremendous winds down there. So he hooked up the tent on some poles and tried to make a sail. But you can notice that somebody's pushing it. So, but it's very famous for that picture.
Yeah. Yeah, that
Going into town without
pushing
gas.
it a little uphill, it looks like. That'd be a
Well,
job.
yeah, they should sort of tilt it. I think it's level. But that was the old Model T, and they spent a year and a half with that vehicle. So
what was your mom's role on the trip?
well, she was the dutiful wife. I think, well, there's a thing. That was a cave they lived in. It was her favorite cave. She had a kitchen down below, and upstairs was the duplex, was their bedroom upstairs. She enjoyed that a lot somehow, and a big mystery in my mind how she could accomplish that level of comfort, but she did.
She really jumped in.
That's how they ate. My father would go out and shoot a duck, and my mother would say, Junius came back with a duck, and we had it for lunch, and it was delicious. Well, she just sped by all the parts in between of plucking it and doing all the rest you have to do. So, and they'd fish and stuff. And this was at the end of their voyage, and they were pulling in. And at this point, my mother says she thought, enough of enough is enough. They were pretty tired.
Right.
And it was pretty wet.
Well, she certainly was such a good sport. So they went with all kinds of guns and everything
They had.
for their meals, right?
My favorite thing that my mother took was a fur coat. I don't know if we have a picture of it, but
Yeah, somewhere I think.
on
Maybe
this
we'll
little
get
boat,
to that.
she stuffed a fur coat, which she wore occasionally. I had a dress or two because they would come ashore to town, and the town would welcome them, and they'd have a party and dances and whatnot. And so she had some fun there.
Do you think she knew what she was getting in for when she said,
I
sure, I'll go along with you?
Don't know that she really anticipated, because in the book there's a passage of their trip down there and how nice it was and how they were taken care of on the boat and all of this, and then suddenly they land and they're off in this little tiny fishing boat.
Oh, yeah.
So I think she was amazing in the way she could adapt to it.
Yeah,
She
well, that
just-
was good. So he was going with or without her, right? He had to go. for
Oh,
his
well, he had
job.
been before, and
Yeah.
yeah, he would have done it anyway. But now he had a companion and somebody to help.
Yeah,
help
and she
out.
did. She was a great helper.
And she was good with the
keeping
collection. She
track
cleaned the
and-
things and packaged them
Yeah.
and labeled them and all.
And then, let's see, she became a bit of a writer.
Well, she was a good writer, as you might see in her
Yeah.
letters. You know, she was very observant and very her grammar was good. Everything was good, but she didn't write much because my father was a perfectionist. And when she would try and write something, he would criticize it. Now, I don't mean, you know, that's a little harsh perhaps, but it was only after his death that she wrote the first book about the same trip, but it was mostly his field notes and her diaries.
Okay, well, we're going to talk more about the book. There's a picture of the book. But we're going to take a little brief moment for a public service announcement, and then we'll be right back with Harry Bird.
Thank you.
With newspapers and media outlets merging all over the country, communities are losing their local voice.
There's so much going on in the community that I think doesn't really, there's a lot of folks who are unaware of it. And I think things like this can bring it out into the community and in that way kind of bring the community together.
Information and to our residents is the key to good governance. And with the national media and local media not often covering us, this is an excellent opportunity for us constantly to communicate with our constituents and also to have them communicate with us.
The best outcomes will be achieved through a community-based organization that grows its operation and scale by means of locally produced programming.
All of our content is volunteer produced, so we do shows from talk shows to music shows, working with high schools.
VSC-TV is committed to ensuring that the investment made to secure these powerful tools will pay great dividends in the community for many, many years.
We're back. And I'm here with Harry Bird, and I'm so glad to be here with Harry. He's talking about the journals that his mother kept while they were on an archaeological work study. And so how did you discover that the journals were even there?
Well, the funny thing is my parents never spoke about this trip very much. It was just understood that they had done this, and that was that. And as she was, I think it was maybe 2 years before she passed, was just before she went, she started talking about it. And I was fascinated. I really didn't know the details. And I said, well, at one point she mentioned she'd kept letters. She had written letters to her parents. And I said, wow, letters, where are they? And she said they were up in the house I grew up in Spuytenduivel. And then she said that her father had his secretary transcribe them. They were typed out. And I've always been with computers, and I thought, wow, this is terrific. I can just take those and put them in a computer form. Well, not so easy, because I eventually got hold of these 4 volumes of letters typed out, but they wouldn't scan because it was an old typewriter with a dirty ribbon, so your letters would evolve, a T would become an I, and so forth. So it took about 4 years before I could get the whole thing transcribed. And then I had to edit it. And I took out sections that were more personal to her family and about her family, and left it more as a journal.
So was it difficult to do that?
It was difficult, but it really opened my eyes to a view of my parents I just never appreciated.
And what was, oh, you did it for yourself, for your children?
Oh, I did it for the family.
For the family.
Because I was astounded, and more, you know, everybody else in the family said, oh, we'd love to see it.
Yeah.
So obviously the way to do it would be to publish it.
Her handwriting actually was, I mean, there's a few samples in the book, very, very good and very clear. And a good speller, I thought, to be out there. Well, I don't think she brought her dictionary or her cell phone, right? Back then.
She would write these letters, and they would keep them until there was a passing ship, a naval ship or some other kind of freighter or whatever. And they'd put the letters into a tin can and then somehow get them up to the ship.
Yeah.
And the ship would take the letters and mail them, and like a month or 2 later, they'd arrive in New York.
Well, I have to say, I got interested in the book because we were at a mutual friend's house, and she had the book on her table, and I asked her about it, and she said, oh, it's great, you know, Harry, it's about Harry's mother, and I'll let you read it. So I got about halfway through, and I thought this would be a great, a great show. But there were a couple things that I thought the whole story was totally amazing. But that they found so many, they had such a social life. They're out in the middle of nowhere. All of a sudden they're going for tea, or your mother must have just been a wonderful person for meeting people.
I think she was a
social.
good compliment to my father.
Yes, I would say that.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, well, about eating, that surprised me, but it was different times. We couldn't go to the Big Y and get a chicken.
Oh, there's no Big Y. No, it was fish
So-
and mussels and birds.
Yeah, and the way that she adapted, I
Yeah.
think it was like instant for somebody so refined, and
I know. This is a big mystery in my mind to this day.
those were your thoughts on her writing as
Yeah.
well. We do have one little clip of.
Oh,
there's more. Oh, it's of her social life. So
we just saw friends. They had made friends all along the way,
Yeah,
and
and
they
friends
had,
along
they had
the-
brought this picnic,
Yeah,
which
Oh, yeah.
included a sheep and a whole bunch of food.
And a whole bunch of people. I think there's even a few. Is there a child? Well, there's at least a dog in there. And there
Now, there
was
they are again. See?
the other one with her fur coat on. Oh, there
it is.
she is.
Yeah, wherever they went, they made friends, and that was pretty much as I knew them all my life. You know, they made friends,
Yeah.
especially my mother.
Yeah. And there is a little part that they met these Indians along the way.
The Alkaloof Indians were the only people they really met on the way down in the boat. And the Alkaloof would build huts out of branches and cover it with skins or whatever. And there's some kids going in the hut.
Okay.
And they're pretty much gone now. I think they're extinct. But
Yeah.
they made friends with them.
And they had your mother brought like a music box or a phonograph, right?
Of all the things, a little
And,
wind-up phonograph and a record. And played it for the Indians.
Here's some music they're playing.
There
It's
they are
pretty
in the
amazing.
boat.
Oh yeah, and you said that they're extinct now. They're
Yes,
no
they're
longer.
pretty much
yeah,
gone.
so that's a really special
But they
memory
loved her playing the records.
and photograph. Yeah, they must have been so amazed. Amazed. So you mentioned that. Well, I'll just listen for another minute.
Okay.
So you mentioned that after your mom did, after your father passed away, she did start writing, and there's a
Yeah.
book
Yeah,
that
she wrote
did.
this Travels in Archaeology in South Chile,
Mm-hmm.
which is the same trip, but it's full of arrowheads and findings and
Uh-huh.
stuff. And I enjoyed her letters a lot more.
Okay.
So, yeah, there it is.
Yeah, that's great.
That's
So
still available.
how long did your dad stay at the Museum of Natural History in
Till,
New York?
what was it, 1982? Just as he died, he was there
Uh-huh.
forever. And he was a very well-known archaeologist, very famous, and did a lot of good work.
Uh-huh. Yeah,
If we had another 2 hours, I'd tell you all about the stuff we found.
Oh,
But no, it takes way too long.
yeah, yeah. So do you think that your children absorbed any of the traits from your
I think
parents?
they did. They adored my parents. They learned a lot of things from my father about curiosity and diligence and
Yeah.
you know, being aware of things around them. And both of them are very aware of what's going on in the world and things around them. And I credit my parents for.
Yeah, that's great.
Me, I'm not so sure.
You have some good positive traits. So we have a little time left. Did you want to mention maybe one thing out of that book that surprised you the most?
Well, it sort of surprised me when the episode of the truck breaking down, the rear wheel broke, and my parents just said, well, we'll just set up camp and wait for somebody to come by and help us out. And there's the picture. Oh, wow, look at that. There's the picture. They set up camp and the
Yeah.
broken down truck, and lo and behold, the postman came along and the next day delivered them a new wheel.
They truly were people who would go with the flow, huh?
And it was so cold that the eggs froze, so my mother gleefully said, we just put it in the pan and it melted and it was perfect.
Yeah. And when the trip was over, they took the little dog back home.
Dog came home.
To New York.
Yep.
Yeah, that's good. Well, that dog had a happy life. So One thing I want, do you want to talk about your little Bermuda race?
No.
No, you're not going to talk about your Bermuda. Okay.
That's another
Okay.
story.
So anyway, you're free to talk about whatever from the book. Where can somebody buy that book?
Yes, well, you can actually go on Amazon and track it down. Use the
Okay.
title, Through Her Eyes, Adventures of Margaret McKelvy Bird.
Okay.
And it's published through Lulu Press. That's the self-publishing. And for those who don't know, it is so easy to self-publish. You just put the type together, make a PDF file out of it, and send it to Lulu, and next day you get a book. It's amazing. It's just amazing.
Well, I'll tell you, it's a fascinating read, and I love memoirs, so I'm going to call that a memoir.
There
That's
you go.
actually a memoir for those 2 years.
I'd sort of like to call it a love story because that's really more to the point. When I got all done, Through Her Eyes was one topic, but it was a love story.
Yeah. Well, I think we're out of time. I'm getting a signal from Ed. So this concludes this portion of the program. But following this, you can see a short documentary created by Harry with original film of his parents' 1933-34 archaeological trip through South America.
Right.
And remember, all shows in this Looking Back series air each Monday evening at 7 p.m., or they can be found on demand by going to the station's website, ValleyShoreCommunityTelevision.com, and following the prompts for the Looking Back. Thank you to our crew today, Christy and Chris, and Ed McCaffrey, our cameraman, and a special thanks to Harry Bird for bringing us this wonderful story. For the Looking Back series, I'm Marianne Pleva. Oh, and thanks for watching.